The Orange Empire, how Fanta turned scarcity into a billion-dollar juggernaut. The story of Fanta is not a typical tale of Silicon Valley innovation, nor is it a carefully curated case study of a planned corporate rollout. It is a story born from the desperate edge of survival, created in the shadow of the Third Reich, and forged by a business model that, quite literally, turned garbage into gold. It begins not with a vision of global dominance, but with a scramble to keep the lights on. In 1939, Coca-Cola GmbH was thriving in Germany. Under the leadership of the authoritarian but brilliant Max Keith, the subsidiary was selling 4.5 million cases of Coca-Cola annually. The German operations were the crown jewel of Coke's international expansion, generating massive revenues that flowed back to Atlanta. But as World War II erupted, the business model faced an existential threat: the Allied blockade. The Coca-Cola Company's entire revenue stream relied on a single, secretive supply chain link: the importation of the distinct 7X flavoring merchandise from the United States. Without this syrup, the factories in Essen and Frankfurt were nothing more than useless metal skeletons. Max Keith faced a binary choice: shut down the 43 bottling plants and liquidate the business, accepting the loss of millions of Reichsmarks in infrastructure, or invent a new product to keep the machinery running and the books balanced. He chose the latter, and in doing so, he inadvertently created a blueprint for crisis management that business schools would study for decades. The first business model for this new venture was defined by zero-cost sourcing. Keith's team scoured the war-torn German industrial landscape for ingredients that were not rationed. They found them in the waste output of other industries. They salvaged whey, the curdled liquid left over from cheese production, and apple fiber, the pressed mash remains of cider production. To this, they added whatever beet sugar could be scavenged from the rationed economy. The result was a beige, inconsistent, and often bitter liquid. They named it Fanta, derived from the German word Fantasie, or imagination, because it took a leap of imagination to taste fruit in it. Despite the questionable taste, the business model worked due to a unique market condition: hyper-scarcity. In a war economy where sugar was rationed and coffee was non-existent, Fanta became a vehicle for caloric intake. By 1943, Fanta sales had skyrocketed to 3 million cases per year. Housekeepers bought Fanta not just to drink, but to use as a sweetener for soups and stews, proving that utility often trumps flavor in times of crisis. This period established the foundational survival cash flow. While the headquarters in Atlanta had cut off communication and funding to avoid treason charges, Max Keith hoarded the profits. He did not pocket the money. Instead, he kept the subsidiary solvent, paid the workers, and protected the American-owned assets from being nationalized by the Nazi regime. When the war ended and American troops entered the bombed-out plants, they found the machines still greased and a pile of cash waiting. The initial strategy had nothing to do with brand equity and everything to do with asset preservation. The profits generated by the garbage soda had saved a multi-million-dollar infrastructure network for Coca-Cola. Post-war, Coca-Cola discontinued the Nazi Fanta. The brand was essentially dead until competition revived it. In the early 1950s, Pepsi-Cola began launching fruit-flavored drinks, threatening Coke's dominance. The Atlanta executives realized they needed a flanker brand to protect their core cola market share. So in 1955, the real Fanta was born in Naples, Italy. This marked the shift from a survival model to a premium sourcing model. SINBEG, Società Napoletana Imbottigliativa Bevande Gassate, began sourcing local Italian citrus. Naples produces some of the finest oranges in the world, distinct from the Florida or California varieties. Unlike the whey-based war drink, this new Fanta Orange was vibrant, carbonated, and contained 12% real orange juice, a standard still held in some European markets today. To differentiate it from the smooth Coke bottle, they designed the ring bottle, with horizontal ridges, giving it a tactile feel that felt crushable and fruity. This logic here was defensive. By 1960, Coca-Cola acquired the Fanta trademark fully for global distribution. The strategy was to use Fanta as a defensive shield. If a customer didn't want a cola, Coke didn't want them buying a Pepsi or a 7-Up. They wanted to capture that dollar within their own system. This move allowed Coke to monetize the non-cola segment, which was growing faster than the cola segment in many tropical markets. Fanta became the gateway drug to the Coca-Cola ecosystem in Latin America and Africa, where fruit flavors were more culturally aligned than dark colas. But how did Fanta scale from a Naples experiment to a brand selling billions of unit cases annually? The answer lies in decentralized innovation. Unlike Coca-Cola, which protects its single formula with religious zeal, Fanta's business model is built on radical adaptability. Fanta is not one product, it is a platform for local flavors. In Thailand, the most popular Fanta is neon green soda, which tastes like bubblegum and pineapple. In Romania, there is Fanta Cioccolata, flavored with elderflower. In Japan, there are over 50 seasonal variations, including Moo Moo White yogurt flavor. By allowing local bottlers to invent flavors based on local availability, such as lychee in Asia or passion fruit in Brazil, Fanta lowered the barrier to entry in new markets. The R&D cost was offloaded to the local partners who knew the palate of the customer better than anyone in Atlanta ever could. Through the 1970s and 1990s, Fanta aggressively expanded into South America and Africa. In Brazil, Fanta became the second largest soft drink, securing a market share that rivals Coke itself in certain regions. By the early 2000s, Fanta joined the exclusive billion-dollar brand club of the Coca-Cola Company, a designation for brands that generate over $1 billion in retail sales annually. Today, analysts estimate Fanta's global retail value sits between $4 and $5 billion annually, making it the second largest brand in the entire company portfolio, purely on volume. To truly understand how Fanta prints money, one must look under the hood at the supply chain and understand the difference between the Coca-Cola Company and its bottlers. Coca-Cola Corporate in Atlanta does not make Fanta bottles. They make Fanta concentrate, a thick, chemically complex sludge of flavorings, oils, and stabilizers. The ingredients for the concentrate are relatively cheap: citric acid, essential oils, and food coloring. The margins on this syrup are estimated to be upwards of 60 to 70%. Atlanta sells this concentrate to a bottler, such as Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific Partners, at a premium markup. This is where the bulk of the sure profit is made. The bottler then buys the expensive syrup, adds filtered water, sweeteners, and carbonation. The packaging, the aluminum can or PET bottle, often costs more than the liquid inside. A standard aluminum can might cost $0.05 or $0.07 to manufacture, while the liquid inside costs pennies. When you buy a 20-ounce bottle for $2.50 at a gas station, the retail margin is roughly 30 to 40%, or about $1. The distributor and bottler take about $1.50. The corporate royalty or syrup share that flows back to Atlanta is roughly $0.3 to $0.5 per unit equivalent. But the genius lies in the efficiency. Fanta benefits from supply chain piggybacking. Because it rides on the same trucks, uses the same bottling lines, and stocks the same fridges as Coca-Cola, its marginal cost of distribution is near $0. If a truck is going to a 7-Eleven to drop off Coke, adding 5 cases of Fanta costs $0 in extra fuel or driver labor. This free ride distribution maximizes the net margin of every Fanta bottle sold. Fanta's marketing budget is massive, likely exceeding $100 million to $200 million globally per year, although exact figures are buried in Coke's consolidated $4 billion annual ad spend. In the early 2000s, Fanta was struggling in the US. It was seen as a kids' drink. The solution was the Fantanas, a girl group marketing campaign featuring the jingle, "Wanta Fanta?" The campaign sexualized the drink slightly, targeting teenage boys and young men while keeping the colors vibrant and fun for younger kids. It worked. The campaign coincided with a double-digit percentage growth in U.S. sales volume over a 3-year period. More recently, Fanta shifted its marketing model to digital engagement. The What the Fanta campaign released mystery flavors in blue or green liquids with 0 flavor descriptors. Customers buy the drink for $2, scan a QR